The fog did not roll in that October morning. It bled. Thick and low, it curled around the ankles of the cattle, blanketing the Kentish moorland like wet wool draped over a dying man. Constable Eli Tranter, in his woolen coat, 2 sizes too large, and boots caked with marsh, had trudged 3 miles before he saw the chimney. He wasn't expecting a chimney. He'd been following a complaint from the vicar's wife. A dog, gone missing. Nothing more. But as he crested the hillock near St. Bartholomew's Hollow, the old fire tower came into view, rising out of the earth like a finger accusing heaven. The structure, unfamiliar to him, stood in the clearing where no structure should be. Tranter frowned. The town had no records of new buildings. He knew because he was the one who filed them. Drawn forward by a prickling at the nape of his neck, he approached the house, if it could be called that. It leaned slightly to the left, as if tired of holding secrets. Shingles clung to the roof like scabs. The windows, round, not square, were rimmed with iron latticework in the shape of twisting vines. The door, though, was the oddest part, bone white, and not just in colour. Tranter tapped the surface with his truncheon. It rang like porcelain, a tight, hollow echo, and then he saw it, a seam, a faint fracture at the edge of the threshold where time or moisture had caused the material to split. Inside that seam, marrow. He stepped back, hard. "Dear God," he muttered, fumbling for the rosary he no longer wore. A habit, long shed, clawed its way back into his chest. He circled the house, each footfall slower than the last. The foundation was patchwork, blocks of pale stone, seamlessly mortared. But now, up close, he could see grooves, lines, curved, too smooth for stone. Number, not stone. Femurs. The house was made of bones. At least 400, he would later estimate. Femurs, ribs, scapulae, arranged like Gothic mosaic. Skulls capped the archways like grotesque gargoyles, some still bearing gold fillings or fused jawlines. He did not go inside. Not that morning. Instead, he ran. Not with a constable's stride, but a child's sprint. He tripped once, twice, and by the time he reached the parish road, his trousers were soaked in peat and blood from a gash he couldn't remember receiving. The town bell rang 3 times that day, not once. An old code. It meant, something is wrong in the woods. A week later, the town council summoned a carpenter named Josiah Greaves. Known for his discretion, Greaves had once built gallows for the crown and a baptismal font for the same priest who blessed it. He was trusted, or at least tolerated. Greaves was instructed to dismantle the house. He lasted 6 minutes inside. They found him slumped beside what resembled a staircase. Ribs bent into arches, hand bones shaped into balusters. His eyes were wide, mouth agape, a nail clutched in his fist. He wouldn't speak again, not for 7 months. And when he did, he muttered, "Only this. The house listens." The structure was left alone after that. No law could explain it. No journal recorded its construction. No one claimed to know the man who built it. But someone had. Someone with access to hundreds of bodies. Someone who'd built a home from the remains of those the town no longer missed. Inside the church records, beneath water-stained ledgers and mould-bitten pamphlets, the Reverend's assistant found a name circled in charcoal. Not ink, charcoal. Dr. Merrick Glass. Not buried, not recorded, just written, once. And beneath it, in a different hand, he said the dead were better listeners. By the end of October 1863, the House of Bones had acquired a name, though never spoken aloud in church. The Listening House. It was the widows who named it first. whispered behind gloved fingers as they passed black lace over tea. Then the farmers, who turned their carts an extra mile wide rather than cut through Bartholomew's Hollow. Finally, the children, who drew it in the dirt, square boxes stacked with X's for eyes and gates made of teeth. They were told not to speak of it. That silence was safer. But in silence, stories multiply. The first came from Mrs. Harriet Leames, widow of the town's former physician. She visited the rectory the morning after the council meeting, her hair wet from fog, her voice thin and trembling. She had a notebook, leather-bound, cracked at the spine. "This was my husband's," she said. "He kept receipts of every burial he conducted or witnessed. There's something missing." Father Whitcomb turned the brittle pages. The entries were precise: names, dates, ages. A neat column for the cause of death. From 1855 to 1860, all accounted for. But in 1861, the ink faded and the handwriting changed. There were gaps, empty lines. "See there," Harriet whispered, pointing. 16 deaths between April and July. But no names, no notes, just tally marks, 1 mark per line. 16. No funeral records, no coffin orders. And the cemetery ground shows no fresh plots from that spring. Nothing. Father Whitcomb asked if she had ever heard of Dr. Merrick Glass. She had, once, in passing. A lecture given at the Apothecaries' Hall, 1858. A man with hair too neat and eyes too still. He spoke about bones, how they remember things others began to speak too. At the tailor's, a boy named Elias claimed he saw smoke rising from Bartholomew's Hollow 2 nights after the house was found. But it wasn't fire smoke, he said. It smelled like sugar and meat and something wrong. His father slapped him for speaking nonsense. At the printing press, an apprentice named Mortimer found an old advertisement slip jammed between the presses. It was dated April 3rd, 1861, and printed in faded grey ink. Professional anatomical preparation, discreet services, consultation by candlelight. M.G., inquire by post. Glass, Bartholomew's Hollow. The post ledgers had no such address on record, but the typeset matched Mortimer's master's style. It had been printed right there in town. By November, fear had curdled into ritual. Some women hung garlic over their chimneys. Others chalked crosses under their doormats. One housewife buried her daughter's dolls under the herb garden, saying their eyes kept turning toward the hollow. The constable tried to calm things, but Eli Tranter himself had not returned to the clearing. When pressed, he gave an official statement. Structure remains undisturbed. Investigation pending Crown approval. But off record, he confessed to the vicar's assistant. "I've heard music coming from it. No instruments, I know, just rhythm, like breath caught in a bellows." That same month, a town clerk named Gerald Panks, meticulous, unmarried, considered dull, sent a letter to the Historical Society in Oxford. The document, preserved in the Ashmolean archives under file number HS/GRP/1093, reads, November 17th, 1863. To the archivist, I submit for your attention an inquiry regarding an individual who may have practiced anatomical assembly without sanction. Name, Merrick Glass, no title formally awarded per parish rolls. Last known sighting, spring of 1861, possibly connected to deaths unrecorded. Evidence, one structure of non-standard composition located beyond Hollow's Field. Questions. Was Merrick Glass affiliated with any known university, military hospital, or surgical college? Were any permits issued allowing anatomical work in Kentish parishes during wartime exemption? My interest is historical, not judicial. Respectfully, G. Panks. The society did not respond, but 3 days after posting the letter, Gerald Panks was found unconscious on the steps of the parish hall. His coat was missing, and his fingers were blue from cold. He recovered, but his records show no further correspondence. In fact, his writing stopped altogether. The only other documented mention of Merrick Glass before the war was found in a ledger from St Agnes Workhouse, dated February 1860, now held at the Canterbury Archives. Entry number 1222. One visitor, name M. Glass. Stated purpose, skeletal examination. Carried a leather case, declined tea. Observed children's limbs with gloved hands. Did not return. By year's end, a priest named Father Rusk from a neighbouring parish arrived to bless the hollow. He walked the perimeter, muttering Latin over frozen ground. When he reached the house itself, he placed his hand on the bone-white door. He jerked back. Later, in a signed statement, he said, "It was warm. Not like skin, like stone that remembers fire. And I heard something. Breathing, perhaps. Not from inside, but from beneath. In every town, there is a thing not spoken of. In Greystone Parish, it became this. Children who whispered about the listening house were made to stand barefoot in the river. Men who lingered near the hollow were forbidden burial in consecrated ground, and women, especially expectant mothers, were told never to enter the woods after nightfall, not because of wolves, because of footsteps, bone on bone, coming from a house no one built." The name returned again in December 1863, this time in ink and not charcoal. A retired field surgeon by the name of Lieutenant Albert Fenro came forward reluctantly in response to the town's growing unease. He was in his 60s, with frost-coloured whiskers and a voice made brittle by laudanum. Fenro had served in the Crimean War and settled in Greystone Parish in 1859 with a limp and a silence he rarely broke. His one companion was a black mastiff named Reuben. He requested that Father Whitcomb meet him privately at his home on Shackle Lane. What he offered was not gossip nor theory. It was a memory and a sketchbook. "I knew Merrick," Fenro said, sliding the leather-bound book across the table. "But only as you know a scalpel, for its edge." The sketchbook was kept in the archives of St. Thomas Hospital for several decades before being moved to private holdings. Within it are 52 pages of anatomical studies, human bones drawn in pencil, each rendered with obsessive precision. On page 17, a spinal column labelled Fused Post-Mortem, case number 11. On page 34, a foot with the metatarsals arranged into a hand's configuration. Beneath it, useful alternative structure. On the final page, a house, roughly sketched, sloping left, a chimney made from stacked vertebrae, and a note in the corner, so faint it required magnification. Each one once held weight. Now they hold together. According to Fenro, Merrick Glass had not been a formally recognised doctor. He had served briefly in the war, not on the field, but in the corpse stations. The dead were his text, Fenro said. He catalogued limbs, measured cavities, boiled flesh from bone. The rest of us drank to forget. He etched notes on jawbones. When asked why someone like Glass would come to Greystone Parish, Fenro only shrugged. He said the town was quiet, that the soil was soft. It was Mrs. Bettina Marsh, the records clerk's widow, who uncovered the next piece, entirely by accident. She'd been restoring the town's oldest marriage certificates, housed in the vestry's root cellar, when she found a folder wedged between two ledgers. The paper was damp but legible. A birth record. Name: Gabriel Elias Glass. Born September 12th, 1851. Parents: Merrick Glass and Isadora Bellamy, deceased in childbirth. Notes: Midwife reports infant did not cry. Eyes open at delivery. Baptism refused. There were no further entries about the child. No school attendance, no medical visits, no death notice. But what followed, 20 pages deeper into the stack, was an application. Petition for residential permit. Hollows Field. Denied applicant. Merrick Glass year. 1856. Purpose: anatomical retreat and place of silence. Remarks: rejected on grounds of unzoned burial land. Yet someone had crossed out rejected in faint graphite. Beneath it, reconsidered by Alderman R.C., March 1857. The initials matched Roger Close, a now deceased alderman whose death certificate was dated May 1858. Accidental drowning in baptismal font. A highly irregular event. No inquiry followed. A fuller picture of Merrick Glass began to form. Not from direct observation, but from the shadows he left in official paperwork. He purchased no food, no medicine, no tools from the local smith. He was never seen at market, and yet he lived, and so did the boy. The boy, Gabriel, was never enrolled in the Greystone School, nor in the church registry of sacraments. But one visitor remembered him, a travelling tinker named Amos Bell, now long buried in the poorhouse cemetery, gave an account in his 1872 interview with the Kentish Rambler, preserved on microfiche. Stopped once in Hollow's Edge, mid-afternoon, saw a boy, pale as lamb's milk, sat by a tree with a book too heavy for his arms. He was counting aloud, not numbers, bones. I asked where his father was. He said, "Inside." I asked what the house was made of. He said, "Old promises." Never went back. There were no known photographs of Merrick Glass or Gabriel, but a crude woodcut was discovered in a discarded issue of the Anatomist's Mirror, a fringe publication from 1862. The page was unsigned, captioned only, "The Listener." The illustration shows a man with hollowed eyes and a child at his feet, pointing to a wall made of femurs. Both figures are barefoot. The house looms behind them, unfinished. From what remains, scholars have inferred the following. Merrick Glass was obsessed not with death, but with structural memory. He believed bones retained some echo of what they once supported. Gabriel may have been both subject and collaborator. No neighbours ever reported sounds of crying, laughter, or quarrel. But distant humming. Yes. A low thrum like glass under pressure. The house may have been built not in one summer, but over 6 years. Accounts differ. Some say it appeared suddenly. Others recall sightings of strange wagons by moonlight. What is certain? Someone authorized the building. Someone allowed silence to grow that loud. No living descendants of the Glass family were ever found. No wills, no estate. Just a name in charcoal. And a chimney that still stood, long after the rest had rotted. The first public event occurred at precisely 4:13 a.m. on January 9th, 1864. It was recorded in the incident logbook of the Greystone Parish Watch, entry number 0081. Screaming heard from Hollow's Field. Not animal. Multiple witnesses. Wind still. Sound sustained for 37 seconds, then ceased. No smoke, no flame. 3 residents. Mr. Alfred Birch, baker. Miss Clementine Rouse, caretaker. And Elias Tranter, son of the constable, had independently described the same sound, as if lungs had been stretched wide, like something waking too quickly. A long inhale, but backward. The following morning, 2 of the town's dogs were found dead. No visible wounds. Eyes open, mouths ajar, as if still listening. The constable refused to enter the hollow again. He deputized a gravedigger named Mott to inspect and report. Mott was a blunt man, partial to gin, known for digging quickly and speaking slowly. He returned after 90 minutes, alone, pale and trembling. "I found the house as it was," he said, "but the door was ajar. Opened outward, not in. That wasn't how it was built. And inside, I saw the chairs had been moved chairs, plural. 2, Mott clarified, 1 large, 1 small, facing the same direction. When asked if he'd touched anything, he shook his head. There was something wrong with the light in there. It didn't match the time of day, as if it was lit from underneath. On January 14th, a group of boys dared each other to throw stones at the house. It was late afternoon, and the hollow had begun to freeze over in sheets of dark ice. One of the boys, Edwin Hobbs, aged 11, lobbed a flat stone toward what he thought was the chimney. It did not strike the building. Instead, it stopped in mid-air, then dropped vertically, soundless, as if pulled through syrup. Edwin screamed. The others fled. He returned home trembling, his teeth chattering, though it was not cold. When his mother examined his palms, she found faint parallel welts, as if he'd clutched something too tightly or been held. The following day, a report reached the parish from a railway surveyor working half a mile east of the hollow. He had been charting ground for a proposed telegraph line when his compass failed. The needle spun without friction for 11 full rotations before freezing, pointing not north, but west, directly toward Hollow's field. He recalibrated and tried again. Same result. The surveyor noted it in his field diary, now held at the Museum of Rural Engineering, entry number S of VC 1387. I stood still and listened. The birds had stopped. Not just quiet, absent. I've measured hundreds of plots, but never one that felt watched. He left the area without completing the mapping. Then came the incident at St. Bellamy's Church, 2 weeks later. The pipe organ malfunctioned during evensong. Mid-hymn, the notes dropped, then reversed, playing the second stanza backward. Parishioners described it as a shrieking in reverse, notes falling upward, and like a windmill turning in a flooded sky. The organist, a Mr. Daniel Rushford, passed out and suffered a nosebleed. When he awoke, he kept repeating a single phrase. Bones have memory. Bones have memory. The organ was dismantled the following morning. Inside the lowest pipe, technicians found a small object wedged at the base, a child's tooth charred at the root. In response, the parish council ordered the periphery of Hollow's field sealed. They erected a veche wooden fence 6 feet high, painted black. 4 signs were posted, 1 on each side. No entry. Private estate trespassers will be prosecuted. By order of the Crown, 1864. But no estate was registered. No Crown approval was ever filed. The order, it seemed, had come from elsewhere. In late February, as the frost began to thaw, the town suffered a strange rot. Wooden pews, fence posts, and window frames began to soften, not from rain, but from within. The grain pulped, knots darkened. One coffin, exhumed due to a legal dispute over burial rights, was found partially melted. The corpse inside had shifted, face down, teeth missing, though they had been accounted for at burial. The presiding doctor made no official note, but in his personal ledger, later found among his estate papers, he'd written, "It is not decay, it is rearrangement." Then, on March 1st, 1864, Miss Agatha Bell, aged 82, former headmistress of Greystone's girls' school, approached Father Whitcomb after Mass. She brought with her an old volume, On the Architecture of Contemplation, by Brother Caldus, printed 1811. It was an obscure theological treatise, banned in some dioceses for its implications about living memory structures. Agatha had marked a passage. To build with what has once lived is to make a mouth, to give shape to breath. If the parts remember their function, then the whole may begin to listen. She looked up, her voice clear despite her age. The house was not made for shelter. It was made to learn soon after. Agatha disappeared. No note, no witness, just a slipper left near the Hollow's gate. And from the top of the chimney that night, smoke once again, thick, sweet, and rising against the wind. The town no longer argued about whether something was wrong. They simply disagreed on what it wanted. Some believed it was a remnant of the war, psychological, physical, moral. Others whispered of the occult, of anatomical rites hidden in fringe monasteries. But most chose to forget, to bury the house in paperwork, to close maps, to raise children with different stories. And yet, the house remains, its door still ajar, its chairs still turned, its walls still warm. By early April of 1864, Greystone was no longer the quiet parish it had been. Letters to neighbouring towns went unanswered, supply carts rerouted, new priests, sent from Rochester and Chatham, politely declined long-term assignments. Whatever stillness had once cloaked Hollow's Field was now pierced, not by action, but by reaction. The townspeople had begun to change. April 4th, the records show the first abandonment. An entire household, the Mattingly family, who had lived above the cobbler's shop on Griggs Lane for 3 generations, was found missing. Furniture intact, beds unmade, the morning fire still warm in the hearth. The only item missing was the grandfather's pocket watch, last documented in the probate list of 1837, silver hunter case, engraved with initials AM, chime intact, regulator firm. It would later be found beneath the front step of the listening house, its second hand ticking backwards. The next week, 2 girls failed to return from school. Lydia Ponsby, age 9, and her cousin Alma, age 11, had taken the usual route past the pond and orchard gate. They were seen by a milkman at 2:17 p.m., laughing, skipping stones. Lydia wore a red ribbon in her hair. The ribbon was found the following morning on the fence surrounding Hollow's Field, knotted tightly around a piece of fractured femur. A note was carved beside it in Latin, on the inside of the bone. Audient. Non loquentur. They will listen. They will not speak. No one in Greystone claimed to know Latin. By mid-April, 6 families had left, each abandoning their homes under pretense of travel or illness. They left no forwarding addresses. One cart was seen heading south, its wagon tarped and silent. The youngest child was visibly weeping, holding a toy horse carved from bone. The town's schoolmaster, Mr. Edwin Cloak, attempted to rally logic. He organised a town hall meeting on April 18th at the old cider house, insisting the events were collective stress responses and that the listening house was a curiosity, not a threat. 17 citizens attended. Cloak brought ledgers, maps, a copy of the town census, and 4 newspaper clippings from the Chatham Register dating back to 1861, all referencing the war and its psychological toll. His presentation lasted 12 minutes. At minute 13, the lights flickered, the chimney belched soot, and all 17 attendees heard very clearly a second voice joined his. Not above, not below, from behind them. No one turned around, not one. Cloak was found the next morning in the rectory garden, curled into the base of the old yew tree. He was unable to speak. His hands trembled in fixed rhythm. 5 taps, a pause, then 5 again. He died 3 weeks later from unknown causes. On the skin of his chest, a bruise in the shape of a small handprint. The priest, Father Whitcomb, who had until now served as the town's anchor, finally broke silence. On April 23rd, he delivered a sermon titled, "That Which Is Not the Grave." The transcript survives, written in his own hand. We are not cursed. We are remembered. That is worse, for memory is active. The house does not haunt, it recalls. Each bone placed, each life taken. An act of citation. The house is an archive, and we are its index. He ended the sermon without benediction. No choir sang. The candles remained unlit. 2 pews were found later that evening, splintered from within. There was one who tried to act, a tinsmith named Harold Peel, widowed and childless, announced his intent to destroy the listening house. He claimed he'd had a dream of his late wife, whispering that the chimney hides the first sin. He brought with him oil, flint, and a sack of coarse salt. He entered the hollow at 4 p.m. on April 29th. At 4:17 p.m, smoke was seen, but not black nor grey. It was pale green, and it rose in reverse, curling down the chimney instead of up. At 4:23 p.m, Peel ran from the hollow, shirtless, blood on his forearms and throat. His final words, spoken to the midwife who found him: "I struck it, I lit it, but it knew me, knew her name, spoke it with bone." He died that night. The sack of salt was later found melted. The oil can was fused shut. The house, however, remained, not scorched, not blackened, only changed. The chimney was taller. The town's final attempt at resolution came on May 2nd, 1864, when an official envoy was sent from Maidstone. Colonel Horace Dunwell, aged 42, led the small investigative detachment, 2 men, 1 medic, a cart with surveying tools. They were due to return in 3 days. They never did. What returned instead was the horse, unharmed, unharnessed, and marked across its flank in red chalk. "Listen, or be remembered differently." The markings could not be scrubbed off. By summer, Greystone Parish was half empty. The church locked, the school closed, the rectory's bells silent. But the house grew louder. Noises reported, scraping at dusk like fingernails against metal. Knocks in threes, always from underground. A baby's wail, too slow to be natural, stretched like fabric over fire. And then, silence. A sudden stillness fell upon the town, recorded in journals from July onward. No birds, no foxes. Even the river moved more slowly, according to a miller's logbook that recorded the wheel turning 17% slower over 14 days, despite identical water levels. There were no more disappearances, no more sightings, just quiet, as if something had finally settled, or begun to truly listen. The first formal attempt to document the Greystone events came not from local officials, but from an outsider. In 1871, 7 years after the parish fell silent, a junior historian from King's College London named Miss Ellsworth Carrow arrived in Kent under the pretense of cataloguing minor rural settlements lost during the railway expansions. What she found instead were gaps in land registries, in birth records, in tax ledgers. Whole tracts of civic history simply ended in 1864, replaced with blank spaces, missing volumes, or heavily redacted pages. she made her way to Greystone. What remained was skeletal. 7 families, 1 blacksmith, a post office with no clerk, and the crumbling remains of St. Bellamy's Church, whose bell no longer swung. The listening house still stood. Caro made no attempt to enter, but she did walk the hollow's perimeter, sketching the structure from a safe distance. Her notebook, now held in the rare manuscripts room of King's College, Archive ID KC-LC-231B, contains meticulous illustrations, accompanied by notations in the margin. Eastern wall now bowed inward. Suggests pressure from within. Chimney taller by approximately 3 feet from original reports. Ribs appear repositioned into circular reliefs, possibly symbolic. But her most important discovery came not from the house, but from Greystone's former schoolhouse, where she pried open a storage cabinet, sealed with wax. Inside, a tin box marked simply Doctrina. Within it were 4 items. A letter, dated July 2nd, 1861, addressed to a Father Whitcomb. It bore no return name, only the initials M.G. Father, I no longer ask for blessing, only for stillness. The structure is nearly complete. Gabriel's voice now echoes without wind. The marrow listens. I believe we are close to proving that consciousness may be preserved through repetition and reverence. This is not blasphemy. It is memory, rightly arranged. The dead are not gone. They are simply unfocused. My task is to clarify a map, sketched in black ink, detailing the subterranean layers of Hollow's field. It showed 3 concentric rings beneath the house's foundation, marked Layer 1, flesh, Layer 2, stone, and Layer 3, bone. A scrap of cloth, possibly linen, with faded stitching that read, "He asked for quiet." I gave him listening. The thread used for stitching had been chemically analyzed in 1973 and found to contain traces of iron-rich soil and human hair. A journal, written in juvenile script, presumably Gabriel's. The journal contained only 12 pages. Most were observations, drawings of trees, bone diagrams, measurements of footsteps. But one entry stood out. Father says each bone is a syllable. Together they make sentences. Some are questions, some are prayers, but not to God, to the thing beneath. He says I must be the mouth. I do not know how to be a mouth. I only know how to listen. Caro's findings, once published in a limited circulation pamphlet titled Whispers from Greystone, a Forgotten Parish, were dismissed by the Royal Historical Society as morbid fabrication. And yet, in 1874, she received a telegram, anonymous, untraceable, containing only 2 words, correct structure. She ceased all public work thereafter. In 1889, decades after the events faded from public memory, a priest visiting from Prague stumbled upon a footnote in the archives of the Piarist order, a Catholic teaching brotherhood known for preserving rare manuscripts. The note, dated 1798, read, "Experiment terminated at Ourense Monastery. Building deconstructed. The ossuary was too successful. It heard the sins but began to recite them. Never assemble more than 300 pieces. Silence must be maintained. This document referenced no names, no places beyond vague geographic clues. But one scholar later cross-referenced the Ourense case with a Greystone map recovered by Caro. The architectural similarity was undeniable. 3 rings, a vertical core, a central aperture, what we would now call a chimney. The most chilling clue, however, came not from paper, but from earth. In 1892, workers laying telegraph lines near what was once Greystone uncovered a sealed cavity 18 feet below the surface. Inside, dozens of bones bundled tightly with wire, arranged into spirals. A femur had been inscribed with a series of glyphs. An archaeologist consulted on site, a Mr. Henry Vane, wrote in his field notes, later cited in Journal of Cryptic Archaeology, Volume 4. These symbols are not linguistic in any traditional sense. They follow no alphabetic or pictographic pattern. However, the spacing and repetition suggest notation, as if the bone was meant to be played, or read, or invoked. The cavity was resealed. That same year, a London bookseller received a donation box of unsorted texts from an anonymous estate sale. Among them, a first edition pamphlet of Whispers from Greystone, Caro's forgotten work. Inserted between pages 12 and 13 was a folded note in the same juvenile script found in Gabriel's journal. It read, "It is finished, but it is not full. We must wait for the rest of the story to return." And so we arrive at the unanswered centre. Was the listening house a relic of grief? A father's descent into obsession? Or was it the first successful attempt to preserve human consciousness in architectural form? A house made not just of the dead, but by the dead. Whatever the answer, the pieces remain. In sketches, in bones, in unfiled ledgers, and in whispers that historians and archivists still hear when reading late, alone. The house did not vanish. It persisted. By the winter of 1901, long after Greystone Parish was removed from official cartography and its mail rerouted through the newer post road at Barrow Hill, the listening house still stood, but it was no longer marked, not on deeds, not on maps, not in memory, until February 19th, 1901, when it was rediscovered by a man who had never intended to find it. His name was Walter Litch, an apprentice surveyor with the London Midlands Rail, tasked with documenting outdated field boundaries for the expansion of Line 12A. His journal was recovered posthumously and now resides in the Rail Authority archives under entry number LMRRA/Volume 7. From his February 19th entry, "Fog thick today, instruments damp but functional. Strayed half a mile off the Brindle track when I noticed an elevated clearing. Odd, as elevation not indicated on the plat. A house sits dead centre, unlisted, not stone, not brick. Lattice work unlike anything I've seen. Bones? No, surely not. He never returned to the rail encampment. What did return was his journal, folded neatly inside his leather case, which had been placed, deliberately, atop a milestone 20 metres from the track. The final page, written in near illegible haste. Inside, it's hollow but loud, not echo, resonance. The walls pulse with heat, but not surface heat, core heat. I found stairs that descend. The banister is vertebrae. The steps are ribs. They curve inward. The air smells like memory, like wet paper and candle smoke. At the base, I saw..." The page ends mid-sentence. No body was ever found. Weeks later, a Crown investigator named Mr. Edwin Harrow was dispatched. He arrived quietly, without press or police escort, accompanied by one medical examiner and a local guide. His report, long suppressed but unearthed in the Public Records Office, Box 39/412K, is clinical in tone, devoid of speculation. But one section stands out. Structure still present. Door ajar. Interior construction consistent with anatomical material. Lower chamber found below main level via spiral descent. Temperature 6 degrees Celsius warmer than surface. A chamber exists beneath the chimney. It is spherical. Sound does not carry naturally. Inside 4 chairs arranged equidistantly in a circle. 3 small, 1 large, all facing inward. Central floor comprised of fused bone, etched with spiral lines, possibly decorative, possibly directional. In center, a basin, shallow. Human skulls form the rim. No blood present, but each skull mouth was packed with cloth. No human remains found, aside from construction materials. No trace of lich. The medical examiner fainted during the sketching of the chamber. She was removed from the site. Her only statement, later given to a nurse at King's Hospital: "The house has lungs. You can feel it breathe if you wait long enough." But the most harrowing discovery came not from inside the house, but beneath it. During excavation in 1903, a team from the Royal Academy of Sciences, funded covertly and without public disclosure, found a layer of arranged skulls, each facing downward. They numbered exactly 400. The significance of that number wasn't recognized until a comparative record surfaced from the Greystone burial log, rediscovered during a library audit in Canterbury in 1907. Between 1858 and 1864, exactly 400 individuals were listed as interred pending stone marker or transferred to family plot. All 400 names lacked final confirmation of burial location. All 400 death records were signed off by Father Whitcomb. One skull was extracted, sample number 19B, now held in deep archive at the British Museum under restricted access. Carbon dating confirmed a match with the year 1861. Forensic analysis revealed tool marks consistent with separation for architectural use. One tooth was still fused with a gold inlay. The same dental pattern matched the estate records of Roger Close, the alderman who died mysteriously in the rectory's font. Further examination of the bone revealed something else. Under magnification, along the inside curvature of the skull's frontal plate, a pattern had been etched, not by accident, but with intent. The marks, when transcribed, were not letters. They were musical notations. A symphony of sorts, a recurring four-note pattern looping endlessly. When played on a chamber organ by a musicologist at Oxford, the melody was described as familiar, though none could place it. 3 listeners wept. 1 vomited. All reported hearing a 5th note after the 4th. No such note existed in the sheet music. From 1905 to 1911, 5 additional expeditions attempted to study the listening house. All were incomplete. All suffered from unexplained disruptions, storms, equipment failures, missing personnel. After 1912, the house was declared a structure of historic unreliability, and efforts to catalogue or visit it ceased. It was quietly erased from modern surveys by 1916. And yet, in 1929, a small letter arrived at the London Historical Society. It was unsigned, with no return address. A simple envelope containing a scrap of aged paper. On it, a child's handwriting. Gabriel says it's nearly full. We saved 1 chair. What happened inside the listening house was never captured in full. Not in photograph, not in sound, not in surviving witness. But what remains, maps, journals, musical bone, records of missing children, theological treatises, suggests something greater than architecture, a living monument, a memory engine, a place that hears not with ears but with marrow. Some believe the house is still growing, somewhere in the gaps between parishes and memory. Others say it waits quietly for the final occupant. The final official mention of the listening house appeared in the Kent County Gazette, dated March 8, 1932, in a column titled Forgotten Corners, Villages Swallowed by Time. The article ran only 143 words. It referred to Greystone Parish as largely depopulated due to economic downturn mentioned a curious local legend of a bone-constructed dwelling, and closed with a line now cited by folklorists more than journalists. The church bells no longer ring, but some say the chimneys still do. No images were published. No further issues referenced Greystone again. And then, even the name disappeared. By 1947, Greystone was removed from the Ordnance Survey maps of southeast England. It had no postal code, no phone line, no railway siding. The parish boundary stone was buried during road widening in 1953 and never replaced. It should have been gone. And yet, certain records kept surfacing, like bones washed loose from a long dry grave. In 1969, a researcher named Alma Kinney, writing a thesis on cultural absences in English topography, submitted a Freedom of Information request for unlisted parishes in Kent prior to 1900. She received a plain envelope 2 weeks later with no covering letter. Inside were 3 items: a photograph of a map dated 1856, clearly showing Greystone Parish, and a circled zone marked unpermitted ground west of Hollows Field. A single-page typed summary with the header, Prohibited Structure, L/Zone 9/Observation, Suspended 1912, followed by one line, Do not disturb occupied design. A final note, handwritten in blue ink on the back of a used postcard. It never stopped listening. We just stopped admitting we heard it. She never completed her thesis. In 1977, construction crews attempting to lay fiber optic lines outside a new estate in the region unearthed a chamber sealed in fused limestone. No entry point, no apparent foundation. When opened, it revealed no furniture, no tools, just an alcove. In it, a single wooden high chair, carved with runes later matched to a lost Celtic dialect. Translation: to listen is to remain. The chamber was resealed and misfiled under cultural debris, incomplete provenance. In the early 2000s, hikers following the disused rail line near Barrow Hill began to post vague reports online. Heard whispering, but no one was around. Felt like we passed the same tree twice, even though we were walking straight. My dog refused to go past the edge of a certain clearing. It just lay down, shaking. The location was marked only as somewhere off the map. Satellite imagery, when cross-referenced, revealed a single rectangular shadow, inconsistent with foliage or rock. It measured exactly 36 by 18 feet, the footprint of a mid-Victorian cottage. The image was replaced during the next software update. Today, official historians call the listening house a myth with architectural echoes, an aberration of rural collapse, wartime trauma, and narrative exaggeration. Most records of Greystone remain scattered, uncatalogued or misfiled, but a few pieces endure. In the British Library's restricted folklore collection, a fragment of a prayer allegedly spoken within the house, bone to bearing, silence to shape, name withheld, and memory kept the original author unknown. In the Vatican Secret Archives, a one-line footnote from an 1866 exorcist diary. The house that hears has grown teeth. And in the Museum of Anatomy in Edinburgh, a small placard beneath an unassuming vertebral column labelled Only, donated anonymously, 1902. Claimed origin, Greystone Parish, Listening Foundation. The cord attached to the spine has a rhythm. It beats faintly, 7 times per minute, even without electricity. No one has dared to dismantle it. So where does that leave us? A town erased. A house remembered only in bones and whispers. A boy named Gabriel who became the mouth of a structure built to listen. And a final chair still waiting. The truth remains sealed not by cement or willful ignorance, but by reverence. What we bury out of fear is often what continues to grow beneath us. And the house, perhaps it was never merely built, perhaps it was composed, a structure made from memory, grief, and silence, an instrument designed not to haunt, but to hold names, hold rituals, hold secrets no one else dared to speak aloud. Not all horrors scream, some simply listen forever. If this story unsettled you, good, it should, because somewhere beneath moss and silence, the chimney still stands. And if you're ever walking alone through a place not marked on your map, and you feel like something is watching, not with eyes, but with memory, don't speak. It's already listening. Subscribe for more forgotten horrors, buried histories, and the untold architecture of fear. There are darker corners still waiting to be uncovered.